The Vorreth transports made 3 jumps in 4 hours, which told Captain Zara Nkemdi everything she needed to know about how frightened they were. Frightened and not frightened enough. She stood at the tactical rail on the bridge of the UNSS Ardent Cross and watched the jump trace play out across the holographic field, a chain of 3 transit flares, each one carrying the Vorreth collection convoy deeper into their sovereign buffer zone. The convoy had left Peregrine Research Station at 1100 hours. The station's automated distress beacon had fired at 1107 minutes. Zara had been in transit drive inside of 30 minutes, and the Ember Court had been behind her in under 90. 240 warships did not travel quietly. She knew the Vorreth could see them coming. The 3 jumps were not an attempt to escape. The Ardent Cross was faster than any Vorreth transport, and the Vorreth knew it. The jumps were a statement, a demonstration that the Ascendancy was retreating to home territory, where humanity's reach, in their estimation, would soften, where precedent would reassert itself, where the correct channels would be invoked, and the correct apologies exchanged, and the correct compensations offered, and eventually the 23 people aboard those transports would come home, having experienced something they would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe accurately to people who had not been there. Their estimation was wrong. "Third jump trace confirmed," said Lieutenant Haas from the sensor console. "Convoy bearing unchanged. They're running a direct line to the collector temple at Vorreth Station." He paused. "We have an intercept solution in 11 minutes at current drive." "Hold it," Zara said. "Not yet. I want all 240 ships in formation lock before we engage their gravity perimeter. They need to see the whole answer at once." She kept her voice level. She had been keeping her voice level for 4 hours and 18 minutes, which was the total duration of this crisis, and she intended to keep it level for however long remained. There would be time after for the other thing. Her younger brother Kofi was 22 years old. He was a climate researcher 3 months into his first independent posting, studying particulate exchange between adjacent biomes on a world in neutral space. He had been aboard Peregrine Research Station to resupply when the Vorreth collector ships arrived. He had been on the manifest that came back with the distress beacon. 23 names, researchers and station staff, all human, all taken under what the Vorreth Ascendancy would formally describe as the Sacred Taxonomy Acquisition Protocol. Zara had read the Ascendancy's cultural brief during the transit. The Vorreth believed that all species in the galaxy existed on a divine scale of ascending complexity, and that it was the holy obligation of the most complex themselves to catalog and preserve specimens of lesser forms before those forms altered or disappeared into the entropy of time. They had been doing this for 200 years. They had taken members of 11 species that humanity knew of. 8 of those species' governments had filed formal protests with the Interstellar Assembly. All 8 protests had been answered with gracious theological explanations and occasional diplomatic gifts. None of the 8 had pursued further action. None of the 8 had sent 240 warships. "Formation lock in 3 minutes, said Commander Adami at the ops console. Zara nodded once and turned back to the forward display. The Vorreth Collector Temple at Vorreth Station was a structure the size of a modest moon, orbital, ringed with what the Ascendancy called the choir, a defensive lattice of energy emitters that could, in theory, deter a squadron-level incursion. In theory. The Ascendancy's military doctrine had been built across centuries around the assumption that cultural prestige and theological authority were their own form of deterrence. They had never been tested at fleet scale. Their choir had never needed to fire at anything larger than a customs dispute. "Com traffic from Vorreth," said Lieutenant Haas. "They're hailing us on the diplomatic frequency. 3 separate channels now. Record all of them. Don't answer. Captain." "Record them." She let the silence stand for 2 seconds. "They have had our people for 4 hours and 20 minutes. They can have our answer the moment the formation locks." The formation locked 4 minutes past the estimate. She watched the confirmation cascade across the tactical board squadron by squadron, each green light a hull pulled from standing patrol rotations, from fleet exercises, from ready reserve berths at Titan and Ganymede, and the 3 deep space relay stations. Earth had not assembled the Ember Court from nothing. The court had existed in prepositioned ready state for years, because the Security Council had stopped pretending that situations like this one were impossible. The Council had simply declined to publicize that assumption, and the Ascendancy had declined to inquire. "Formation confirmed," said Adami. "All 240 warships, Vorreth's gravity perimeter in 9 minutes at current speed." "Open the Vorreth diplomatic channel," Zara said, "the primary one." The response came in 11 seconds. The face on the display was an elder of the Ascendancy, broad crest, pale orbital markings, layered robes that probably cost more than a frigate. His expression carried the specific quality of a being who had never, in a long life of acquiring authority, been addressed from a position of weakness. "Captain," he said, "this demonstration of force is understood as an expression of grief. The Sacred Taxonomy Protocol provides full accommodation and care for all acquired specimens, and we invite a formal dialogue regarding." "Elder," Zara said, "I am not expressing grief. I am delivering notification. Earth Security Council Resolution 1847, passed 4 hours ago by unanimous vote, authorizes the enforcement action I am currently executing. The resolution names the Vorreth Ascendancy as a non-compliant actor under the Interstellar Harm Accords, specifically Articles 9 and 17, a prohibition on non-consensual biological seizure of protected persons in neutral transit space. She kept her eyes steady on the display. "I am giving you one opportunity to return all 23 humans to the receiving bay of this vessel in undamaged condition. I will hold this formation at the gravity perimeter for 30 minutes. After that, I will proceed." The elder's crest rose perceptibly, the Vorreth equivalent of surprise shading toward alarm. "You are threatening a sacred facility with military force over a specimen acquisition. The humans aboard this station are being treated with the full reverence accorded to rare and valued." 29 minutes and 40 seconds, Zara said. She closed the channel. She had said what she needed to say, and the record would reflect that she had said it clearly and given full opportunity for compliance. She walked to the forward window and looked at the stars ahead, at the distant glint of Vorreth Station's choir lattice catching light from the system's primary star. Behind her, the bridge crew held their stations in complete silence. At the 20-minute mark, a secondary Vorreth vessel peeled away from the station's docking ring and began a slow arc toward the formation's outer flank. Haas called it out immediately, an Ascendancy Advocate-class diplomatic courier, the kind dispatched to probe intentions before committing senior personnel. The Vorreth were testing whether the formation would flinch. Zara watched the Advocate track across her tactical display and said nothing. Not one of the 240 ships moved. The Advocate reached the outer edge of the formation, slowed, held position for 90 seconds, then reversed course and drifted back toward the station. Whatever its sensors had found, it was not the softening the elder was looking for. 9 minutes remaining on your deadline, Haas said quietly. She did not answer him. The elder's fourth hail came in at the 7-minute mark. She let it queue unanswered. At 6 minutes, a second elder delivered a statement on the theological inviolability of the Collector Temple and 2 centuries of peaceful Ascendancy stewardship. She listened without responding. The statement ended. She closed the channel. At the 30-minute mark precisely, a Vorreth shuttle left the station and began a slow transit toward the Ardent Cross's receiving bay. It carried 11 people. 11 out of 23. Zara stood at the tactical rail when Haas read out the biometric count. She stood there for 3 full seconds with her hands flat on the rail, looking at the number on the display. Then she turned to Adami. "Bring the forward elements to engagement threshold," she said. "Targeting priority, the choir lattice emitters. Full overlap coverage across every element of the defensive ring. I want every emitter bracketed simultaneously before we transmit anything further to the station." "Targeting solutions confirmed in 35 seconds, Adami said. The second channel request from the Elder came in before the solutions were complete. She let him wait until Adami confirmed all brackets locked. "You chose to return 11, she said when she opened the channel. "That tells me the other 12 are alive. It also tells me you believe there is a negotiating position between where you are and where I am." She let the pause sit for a moment. "There isn't one. Return the remaining 12 in the next 10 minutes, or I will begin dismantling your choir lattice and enter the station to collect them directly. The station structure will not be targeted if you cooperate. If you do not cooperate, the tactical judgment on what constitutes necessary force will be mine, and I will apply it without further consultation. The remaining specimens are in Preservation Sanctum 7, the Elder said. His voice had changed. The theological certainty was still present, but something underneath it had shifted, something that recognized a variable that had not been in the Ascendancy's historical models. Moving them requires passage through 3 consecrated transition corridors, each of which must be 10 minutes, Zara said. She closed the channel. The second shuttle launched at the 8-minute mark. It carried 12 people, the full remaining count, confirmed by biometric scan before it cleared the station's docking ring. Zara stood at the sensor board and watched the scan results populate the display name by name, each entry resolving from a data point into a person. Metabolic readings, vital signs, stress indicators, the clinical shorthand of bodies under strain. 22 confirmed. 22 alive. 22 showing elevated cortisol and mild dehydration, and the specific metabolic signature of people who had been frightened for hours and were still not entirely sure it was over. The 23rd name was Kofi Nkemdi. He appeared at the bottom of the second roster. She looked at his biometric readout for 2 full seconds. Alive, ambulatory, minor contusion on the right forearm, cortisol reading far outside the standard range, everything else within tolerances. And then she looked away from the display and back at the tactical board, and the 240 green formation markers surrounding a station that had operated without challenge for 2 centuries. Later, all of it later. 23 confirmed aboard, Haas said. All vital. Medical bay is receiving. Good, she straightened. Transmit the following to Vorreth Station on all open frequencies. Sacred Taxonomy Acquisition Protocol nullified by Security Council Resolution 1847, effective immediately and without appeal. All biological specimens acquired under that protocol from any protected species, held at any Vorreth facility across all Ascendancy-controlled space, are to be cataloged and returned within 90 standard days, or the Ascendancy will become subject to a second enforcement action under the same authority. The Ascendancy will receive the complete resolution text within the hour. Compliance will be monitored by the Interstellar Oversight Committee on a 90-day schedule. She paused for 1 beat. Also transmit the Ember Court's full formation record, time-stamped from moment of lock to current position. Let them see the number. All 240. Transmitted, Haas said. She turned back to the forward window. 240 warships, spread across a volume of space so wide that the outermost elements registered only as transponder signals on long-range scan, sitting in perfect formation outside a station that had stood unchallenged for 200 years. The choir lattice glinted cold in the starlight, all of it targeted, none of it fired upon. The Ascendancy had returned every human before the shooting had to start. That was the intended outcome. It was also not the only outcome Zara had been prepared to accept. The Vorreth Ascendancy had believed that the galaxy's tolerance for human patience was without limit. They had built this belief on 2 centuries of evidence, 11 species collected, 8 formal protests filed, 8 gracious responses delivered, no consequences. They had concluded, through reasonable extrapolation, that force was simply not something humanity applied over what the Ascendancy considered an act of preservation and reverence. They had not modeled for the alternative. They had not understood what 23 names on a distress manifest would cost them. They understood now. Zara held position at Vorreth for 6 hours, long enough for the resolution text to clear Ascendancy administrative channels, long enough to receive the formal acknowledgement of compliance, long enough to watch the Elder's second transmission, in which he described the day's events as a clarification of sacred protocols in light of evolving diplomatic context. She let him finish. She sent no reply. The record existed. The formation telemetry existed. The biometric logs of 23 humans removed from Vorreth custody by the credible threat of 240 warships existed. History had a way of preserving the shape of things regardless of what the defeated chose to call them. She went to the medical bay before they broke orbit. Kofi was sitting upright on a recovery bed, a thermal wrap around his shoulders, a cup of something warm between both hands. He looked up when she came through the hatch. He was thinner than she remembered, and the bruise on his forearm had spread further than the scan suggested, and he had the eyes of someone who had spent hours believing that no one was coming. She sat down beside him and said nothing. "How many ships?" he asked. His voice was steady, which she suspected cost him something. 240. He nodded slowly, as if confirming an answer he had already worked out. "I heard the docking clamps and I thought it might just be one." He looked at the cup in his hands. "One would have been enough." "Yes," she said. "It would have been." But she had not sent one. She had sent all of them, because one was a request and 240 was a sentence, and the Vorreth Ascendancy had spent 200 years not knowing the difference. They had never made an error that cost more than a protest and a diplomatic gift. She had wanted them to understand what a real cost looked like, from every angle, with no room for softening. What had happened today would be in their records for as long as they kept them. 23 humans recovered, 0 shots fired, 240 reasons they had returned every single one. She stood a few minutes later and left Kofi to the medics. The Ardent Cross began its transit home 3 hours after that, the Ember Court falling in around it in loose escort, 240 ships crossing back through the dark the way they had come. The Vorreth Ascendancy tracked them on long-range sensors until the last hull dropped below detection threshold. They did not hail the formation again. There was nothing left to clarify.